Vamos suave.
Welcome.
¿Me puede grabar? ¿Puede grabarte?
Well, I promised you guys a follow-up video if we found out any new information on this mysterious trimaran that washed up on a reef just south of San Andres in Colombia. Needless to say, through some quick investigations and some suggestions from many of you, we found out a lot. But the first one to come back with any positive identification for the boat was my good friend and former crew, Alcino. He immediately recognized her as the Angel B, a boat that has resided in his home island of Curacao for many, many years. He quickly reminded me that when we were on a tour in one of the marinas of Curacao, and I did find this one little clip that shows the Angel B at the dock back in September of 2018 when I was there. She had a fixed pivoting airfoil for a mast, so she was definitely hard to miss. Now the question is, how did the Angel B come to end up on a reef 700 miles downwind, capsized and dismasted? To answer that, I put out a question to some locals and I ended up finding these two guys, Carlos and Dario. Carlos is by trade a professional fisherman on San Andres, and Dario, until recently, ran a business dealing with tourists coming to the island. Well, as you know, the tourism industry came to a screeching halt with the advent of the quarantine, so Carlos contracted Dario as an assistant in his fishing business. On one of their recent expeditions, they ended up finding a little bit more adventure than they bargained for.
They found the boat 22 of April, southwest of Albuquerque Keys.
Now, San Andres is a very small island, so of course fishing is a big part of their day. And being that Carlos and Dario both have families to feed, it only stands to reason they go out fishing as often as possible. Carlos invited me to come aboard and have a look inside the vessel, which of course I was very interested in, so I pretty much surveyed this vessel for almost 2 hours, and I can say with utmost confidence that I know exactly why this boat floundered. But before we get to that, let's go back to where they found the boat.
Agua.
Just over 25 miles south-southwest of the main island of San Andres, there are two tiny islands called the Albuquerque Keys. These keys are very remote, very small, and very beautiful. And they are surrounded by several miles of very shallow reef that make for great fishing. The south edge of this reef has a very steep drop-off, and that is the favored position for diving your catch of the day. And that is exactly where Carlos and Dario found the Angel B. Here you can see the two keys in the distance, and given the space between them, makes it easy to gain a visual line of sight, and if we extrapolate that bearing, you can see it leads right to the edge of the reef at the southwest side of the island. So the guys confirmed that their first dive revealed the mast was still intact on the boat when they found it. But then they observed the mast being broken off in small pieces as the boat drifted closer and closer into shallower water. That solves how it was dismasted. Now the question remains, how and where did it capsize? To understand that, we return to its starting point in Curacao. March 26, 2020, Angel B heads to sea with brand new owners who have just spent the last 3 months refitting her for a long-distance trip across the Pacific, destination New Zealand. Less than 1 day later, March 27th, as detailed on the official Curacao Coast Guard Facebook page, the Coast Guard received a distress notification about a trimaran in need of assistance just north of Aruba. You guessed it, it was the Angel B. And she was flooded big time, taking on water faster than the pumps could bail it out, and the owners didn't know what to do, so they let the Coast Guard come and take them off the ship. All crew were returned safely to Curacao, and the Angel B was abandoned at sea and left to fend for herself. Everyone pretty much assumed that she sank because she was taking on water so fast, but of course now we know she did not sink. And in fact, she managed to cover 700 miles over 30 days without sinking. So to understand how the Angel B came to be capsized, the first thing we need to realize is this is not storm season, so there were no tropical storms, no hurricanes, nothing in this area that could have possibly affected her and of course capsized her. But it still leaves that we have environmental conditions to deal with, so I'm going to open up my Predict Wind offshore app and we're going to have a look at the conditions around this area just to get an understanding what it is that she'd be dealing with. Now the first option being that she could have tripped on a reef. As you can see by the gyres out here, there are all kinds of shallow areas in the whole area where the ocean currents take it around areas of shallow, including this area right here with San Andres and Providencia. The current goes in different directions around all these areas that are shallow, and if she had have hit one of these, then theoretically the first thing she should have lost would have been her rudder and her swing keel, but as you can see in the pictures, neither of those is touched. They remained perfectly intact. Plus, if she had hit one of these reefs, she would probably still be on that reef right now, upside down, grinding away at the coach roof. But as we know, she didn't stay on a reef anywhere else. She arrived down here in San Andres. Now the second option is she could have been hit by a ship. This area is full of ships all the time coming in and out of Panama, heading for all destinations. So very easily she could have had a conflict and collided with one. But again, if she had collided with one, there would be much more substantial damage to one of the nacelles, a lot more damage to the coach roof because the ship probably would have punched the Angel B underwater, most likely breaking her in half, in which case she would have sank. But none of this type of damage is apparent on the Angel B, so again, the evidence doesn't support the theory. Now the third possibility is that she could have tripped on a big wave. The only problem is, knowing this entire area, I know there's not a lot of places where waves that size exist that could actually roll a 43-foot trimaran that's almost 30 feet wide, even if she's partially flooded. Going back to our chart, I can bring you over here and show you this coastline of Colombia. If we look a little closer, we can see there's only a couple places in this area that could generate waves big enough to actually have rolled this trimaran. My first suspicion was here in Barranquilla, and when we sailed here, I know from personal experience that all the wind, waves, current, everything collides right here coming up this bank, and there's a river that comes down with a 3-knot current that causes all of this to basically explode, and it's like a big washing machine with steep vertical waves. We were surfing down 20-foot waves in 40 feet of water, and believe me, it was tense. But again, if it was here that she capsized, then for sure she would have dismasted because the water here shoals up, and that's why the waves are so big. So she would have dismasted here, but of course she still had her mast when she reached over here, so again, it doesn't support the theory. That brings us to my final possibility, which is the one that makes the most sense to me based on how everything turned out in the end. And that brings us to the tip of the northernmost peninsula in Colombia. If we go back down to our weather charts right here, we look at the originating position of the Angel B when she was abandoned at sea, and we can see here is the northernmost peninsula. Now this is the only other area I know where there is a lot of big waves that form because everything converges coming out of the Eastern Caribbean and hits right here. So you have wind, waves, and current all converging on the same area as it shoals up around this northern shore. Now, as you can see, this is the current patterns in the Caribbean Sea, and this is where the boat started. Now she would have had to get across this first path of current right here, which was wanting to take her northward. But if you look back at the original Coast Guard picture, you'll see that even though she was awash, she still had a good portion of her superstructure above the water, including the mast. This would have provided a lot of resistance to the wind, and if you look at the wind for this area, there's a lot. This area is typically always 20 to 30 knots of wind going westerly. Now, if she had stayed with her superstructure above water, she would have followed along this path and gotten caught up here, and it would have just drawn her right down, and she'd have been dropped right down in Panama. But she didn't go to Panama, she ended up here around San Andres. Why? As she came across the north coast of Aruba, this current would have wanted to take her north, but the wind would have wanted to bring her straight down towards the peninsula. Now, if she drifted down around into this peninsula, there's a very good probability that that is where the boat could have been flipped, and now she would have been inverted, and as you know, when she's inverted, she has a lot less resistance to the wind. That would make her direction of travel much more susceptible to the ocean currents than the wind. So now she's in this area of low pressure, and she would have just slowly made her way out here and gotten caught somewhere in here. Even if she came down the coastline, sooner or later she'd have ended up in this area that was going to take her back north. So whether in this north current pattern or the southerly one, it was going to end up here, and you can see as they go around these shallow areas, they rotate and turn around and come back south. even from right here. There's plenty of optional places where she could have been turned back south. And now you look at this gyre right here that comes around the south side of San Andres and Providencia. I'm going to zoom in on that a little bit. As we zoom in, there is San Andres, there is Providencia, and right down here is where the Albuquerque Keys are. And look at the waves. This is the current coming down and coming straight up, heading in a northwest direction, right at the bottom of the key. If we go back to the key, and the current coming from down here to the southeast would have been slowly pushing her northwest up on the reef into more and more shallow water, which of course is what happened and slowly broke the mast off. And here she sits after crossing 700 miles of open ocean all on her own. And then you'll remember from the previous video, the guys got her back to San Andres, where they took her over to the shipping port and used a big crane to flip her back over. So now the only question remains, how did she flood in the first place that set off this entire series of events right from the beginning? That is the question I'm sure we're all asking ourselves. So for that, I take you back to the boat where she sits on her new mooring in San Andres Harbor. This is where we'll take you for a tour of a boat that crossed an ocean upside down all on her own.
Plenty water.
Aquí, my friend, le hemos sacado bastante agua.
Mucha agua, mucha agua.
Todo eso lo tenemos, todo tenemos.
What you got? Fridge?
Very big window, eh? Very big oblong there. Yeah. Very big window, yeah.
One important thing to make note of here is that from what I understand, the new owners of the boat decided to make a power change. They removed the original diesel engine from the main hull and installed dual retractable outboards in the winglets to the nacelles. As it turns out, part of that process is the reason the boat floundered, but more on that later.
El motor tiene un motor y el otro no funciona, uno solo funciona. Los dos funcionan. So, uno falta la hélice, ¿no? Ah, okay. Rick,
See?
all two engines are working. It's very nice. It's very nice. They have all the battery, the two engines working. It's very nice boat. This is another cabin too.
Wow, look at the rig under that mast.
Yeah, wow.
4K esa cámara. Buena cámara, ¿cierto? Bonita.
Mira, que tenía una antes, igual a esta, cuando salimos desde Panamá, el primer día, nos paramos en una isla bonita, un cayo bonito, pasar la noche, habíamos hecho fogata y todo para regresar a tomar la bebida. Una ola nos sorprendió mientras sacábamos el dinghy de la playa y se rompió la espalda se cruzó, se fue al hueso y la cámara completamente destruida. Ella por suerte tenía seguro, pero ya pasamos 2 meses sin cámara.
Bueno, el precio que le estamos poniendo aquí así, no sé cómo.
Los dos motores funcionan. La batería, ¿cuántas baterías tiene? 3 baterías.
Segundo que deja alto.
No, es extraño.
So I think you get the idea that the Angel Bee has definitely seen brighter days. But to illustrate that, I'm going to show you a video from the broker that had her listed last year for sale. You can tell she was in near immaculate condition. This was a very, very nice boat. But through the advent of one major malfunction at sea, she is definitely in need of some TLC.
Blue. Por aquí. Agua. Y por acá.
Because there's a crack here. This is the bodywork where the prop shaft would have went through.
Yeah.
So obviously this is where the leak was coming from. But they took out the engine. So that check valve, it was open before? The through hole? Is that the one he was talking about?
Is open? Sí,
It was open?
estaba abierto antes.
Este sí.
¿Está abierto ahora?
This.
Yo lo cerré.
It
no,
was
it's
open?
closed. No, he closed this.
He closed it.
Yeah, he closed
But
it.
was it open when he found the boat?
Estaba abierto.
When I found the boat is open, they found this open, and he closed.
So that was open.
Yeah.
It was open.
All
And water
this-
coming in here.
Yeah.
So when they flipped the boat when they flipped it up,
Quando tu
this was
revoltaste,
just water.
quando tu revoltaste
So
el bote,
You put the bottle in.
yeah.
Estaba entrando agua bastante por
Yeah.
aquí. Y
Go-
yo lo cerré. Claro, le
go
pusimos
a
la
lot
talla y lo
of-
cerramos.
Go a lot of water outside of this tube, and he closed.
Wow, that's
Sí, sí,
why the
feo,
boat
eh?
sank.
Yes. for
That's
this,
why the boat
yeah.
sank.
And for this, he told before, then the pump don't help anything because
No, that's too much water.
too much water and too much water for the little pump.
Mm-hmm. So
Where-
that's why it sank
where
on
is
the first
place?
day.
Where is the hole? Close the
Eso es
hole.
mientras.
It's
Mientras.
only for stop it for the moment.
But yeah, that's just a bad bottom
Yeah.
job. That's
It's momently
Yes.
repair.
that's not why the boat sank. This is why the boat
This
sank.
is this is why.
That's the water lift muffler.
Yeah.
And they forgot to close the friggin' through
Yeah.
hull. Can you believe it? Oh my god. The new person took this engine out.
Yeah.
You can see that's an engine mount. That's an engine mount. Over here, these are all engine mounts, but the engine has been removed. So back here, this is where the through hull used to be for the propeller.
Aquí tiene todas las mangueras de la gasolina, el combustible, el diésel.
Él dice
That's why
que
all
puede
these filters
ser-
are here.
Él puede decir que quitando el motor desde acá, donde salía la gasolina es donde entra agua. El mismo hoyo donde entra agua, donde entró el agua.
Sí.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's amazing sitting in a boat that was upside down floating around the ocean by itself
Wow.
for a month, eh? See.
Wow.
So that valve right there is the reason the boat sank. It was left in the open position before they put the boat back in the water. The new guys got in the boat, went sailing, didn't realize that this hose was sitting here wide open below the water line and just gushing water into the boat. It filled up the aft cavity here underneath where the old diesel engine was and basically flooded the boat from the ass end, and it just went down, 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 got heavier and heavier until the whole boat was washed. So when the guys here that found the boat had it turned upright there at the dock yesterday, immediately they bailed out the water, and as soon as they bailed out the water, they saw this hose was just gushing water, and they didn't know exactly how to shut it off at the time. They stuffed a beer bottle in it, which of course is very effective. It worked. But then he figured out that that through hull was open, so he's closed it since, and now there's no water coming in. But that, my friends, is why this boat sank. Very, very unfortunate. One bad fitting. Now, from what I know of international maritime law, if a boat is abandoned at sea and somebody finds that boat at sea, if they return it to land under their own power, they own it. That pretty much means that Carlos and Dario have a big project on their hands. But from what I understand, their intention is just to clean it all out and convert it to a motorboat and probably use it in the tourist business here on the island. So of course, I wish them all the best with that. But if any of you happen to be interested in picking the boat up to restore it, I'll leave their contact information in the description. One thing that we all need to learn from this is that this was somebody's dream lost. And all for one simple mistake. That is very, very unfortunate. And never lose sight of that, because this was preventable. But hey, sometimes we just all make mistakes. So watch out for those mistakes, guys and girls, because that's what we all need to learn
Sí,
from
yo me la
this.
robé.
Así como me dijiste.
Amigo.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Take care, everybody. Stay safe, and I'll see you out there.